You ever get that feeling, like the woods are watching you? Not just the trees, mind you, or the shadows playing tricks. I'm talking about something else. Something with a slow, calculating patience that feels ancient and hungry. It's a presence that doesn't just observe, it waits, it considers, and then it acts. And when it acts, it leaves behind a chilling emptiness that no rational mind can fill. I've been a search and rescue officer for over a decade now. In that time, you see a lot. Most cases. They're straightforward, heartbreaking, but straightforward. Lost hikers, injured campers, folks who wandered off the trail a little too far, got disoriented by a sudden storm. We find them, or we find what's left of them. It's tough work, emotionally grueling, demanding every ounce of your physical and mental fortitude, but it makes sense. There's a logical chain of events, a human explanation that, however tragic, allows you to process it, to file it away, to move on to the next call. There's always a reason, a misstep, a bad turn, a sudden illness. We find the person, we administer aid, we recover the body, and the cycle continues, a grim but understandable part of the job. But then there are the others. The cases that claw at the back of your mind. The ones that make your skin prickle, even when you're miles away from the wilderness. Safe in your own bed, with the city lights outside your window. The ones we don't talk about in the break room, not really. Not beyond a quick, nervous glance, a shared shudder, and a swift change of subject to football scores or last night's bad coffee. Because they don't make sense. They defy every rule of nature, every piece of training we've ever received, every forensic principle we've been taught to uphold. They leave you with a gnawing void, a cold spot in your chest that no amount of logic can warm. They leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about the world, about reality itself. I used to scoff at the old legends, the local ghost stories folks would tell about certain stretches of forest, especially the dense, shadowed parts that never quite shake off the morning mist. I thought they were quaint, maybe a little morbid, charming in a rustic, superstitious way, but ultimately harmless. Just ways to explain away tragic accidents in a world without modern forensics or a deep understanding of natural phenomena. Now I know better. Because some of those stories, they're not just stories. They're warnings. They're echoes of experiences that predate us, whispers of something ancient and malevolent. And I've seen enough, witnessed enough inexplicable disappearances and disturbing details to know that what's out there, what takes these people, it isn't human. It's something far older, far colder, and far more patient than anything humanity has ever encountered. The first absence, the first case that truly shattered my logical world. The one that cracked open everything I thought I knew about the wilderness and the limits of human experience, started like any other. It was about a young woman fresh out of college, maybe early 20s, an avid hiker and solo adventurer. She had planned a weekend camping trip deep in the Blackwood Forest, a place known for its dense canopy and winding, sometimes treacherous trails. Her friends reported her missing when she didn't show up for work that Monday, a concerned call to the local sheriff's department that eventually filtered down to us. We followed standard protocol, of course. Sent out the teams, established a grid, K9 units working their magic with tails wagging, eager for a scent. For the first few days, it was just another missing person. Tough, heartbreaking for the family, but familiar territory for us. We knew the drill: initial sweep, expanding circles, interviewing anyone who might have seen her. The usual, painstaking work that often yielded results, even if those results were grim. Then, on the third day of the search, we found her campsite. It was immaculate. The tent was still pitched, neat and orderly, the rainfly taut, the guy lines secured. Her sleeping bag was rolled up inside, as if she'd simply stepped out for a moment. Her portable stove was packed away. Her food hung in a bear bag high in a tree, untouched. Her phone lay on the ground beside the tent flap, screen cracked, but still working, a notification for a missed call glowing faintly on the display. There was no sign of a struggle, no overturned gear, no muddy footprints disturbing the ground around the entrance. It was pristine. Unnaturally so. Like she'd simply stepped away for a moment to answer nature's call and never returned, leaving behind a perfectly composed scene that screamed absence rather than struggle. Except for one chilling detail, a detail that snagged in my mind like a burr refusing to be dislodged. Her car keys. They weren't in her backpack, which was still neatly stowed in the tent. They weren't clipped to her belt, or in a jacket pocket, or even on the ground outside the tent where they might have fallen. They were lying right in the center of her sleeping bag, perfectly placed, almost ceremoniously. It was an impossible detail. Who leaves their car keys, alone and neatly placed, in the middle of their tent, miles from any road, and then simply vanishes into thin air? It defied logic, common sense, and every bit of human behavior I'd ever witnessed. It was the first true crack in the facade of my rational understanding. We expanded the search, pushing further into the denser, more secluded parts of the forest, areas that few hikers ever ventured. Every gnarled branch seemed to claw at my uniform, every stretching shadow twisted into something menacing, playing tricks on my eyes. Days bled into a week, each sunrise bringing with it a fresh wave of physical exhaustion and a deeper, more unsettling sense of dread. The optimism that usually accompanied the early stages of a search had evaporated, replaced by a grim, unspoken acknowledgement among the veteran officers that this was different. Hope, that persistent flicker that kept us going, dwindled with every uneventful grid search, every empty ravine, every untouched clearing. The air grew heavier, thick with unspoken questions, and a growing unease among the veteran officers. The new recruits, those still clinging to the logical explanations, to the belief that every mystery had a solution, started to look at us with confused, searching eyes, their youthful optimism slowly draining away as the days wore on. Then, on the 10th day, 10 miles from her campsite, deep in a ravine that barely saw sunlight even at high noon, we found it. A single small boot. Her boot. It lay there, nestled in a patch of undisturbed leaves, looking as if it had just been gently set down. There were no footprints leading to it, no scuff marks on the dirt, no sign of a struggle, no discarded clothing or equipment. Nothing around it for 20 feet but untouched earth and the gnarled, moss-covered roots of ancient trees. It wasn't kicked off, or lost in a panicked run. It was just there, a lonely sentinel in the oppressive silence. The discovery wasn't a breakthrough. It was another impossible question mark, another piece of a puzzle that refused to form a coherent picture. We never found the other boot. Or the rest of her. Not really. Not the way you'd expect to find someone lost in the woods, not a body, not a complete set of remains. Just a few scattered things impossibly dispersed. Her backpack, torn and empty, was found 2 miles from the boot, snagged on a low branch, its contents scattered in a haphazard circle below, as if dropped from a great height. Her compass lay near the backpack, spinning wildly, its needle refusing to settle, pointing to nothing in particular, yet everywhere at once. And that one boot, impossibly far from anything else, separated by vast stretches of untouched wilderness. It defied every probability, every logical explanation, every rational thought. It was a pattern of absence of partial, unsettling discoveries that spoke of something beyond human agency. They closed the case, of course. The official report read, like all the others, a sterile, bureaucratic accounting of a tragedy. Likely wild animal encounter, subject succumbed to the elements, disoriented, or wandered off the trail. Body presumed unrecoverable due to terrain and wildlife activity. They spoke of hypothermia, of bears, of cougars, of sheer bad luck, of the unforgiving nature of the wilderness. They had to. It was their job to provide a rational explanation, to bring a semblance of closure, even if it was a lie. But I knew better. We all did, the veterans who had seen too much. We knew the subtle shifts in the air when we were out there, the way the forest seemed to hold its breath. We knew the impossibility of those neatly placed keys, of that solitary boot, of the complete lack of any human struggle or coherent trail. We knew the chilling sensation of being watched, a feeling that settled in your bones and refused to leave. Sometimes, even now, years later, when the wind blows just right through the pines outside my window at home, or the shadows stretch long and thin in the early morning light, I swear I can still hear it. That distant, mournful, almost animalistic cry. It's a sound that seems to come from deep within the earth, a primal lament that carries on the wind. It echoes in the quiet moments, a haunting reminder of what I saw, or rather, what I didn't see, out in those woods. And I know, with a certainty that chills me to the bone and haunts my waking hours, that it's not just the wind. It's calling. The forest, it seems, has a way of keeping its secrets. And some secrets, they are best left undisturbed. For to look too closely is to invite the darkness in. My encounter with the first absence, with that young woman who simply vanished, leaving behind only impossible clues, changed me. It chipped away at my rational core, leaving fissures through which a chilling uncertainty could seep in. I found myself looking at the familiar woods with new eyes, seeing not just trees and shadows, but something ancient and predatory lurking just beyond the veil of perception. The official explanation for her disappearance, the neat, tidy file closure, felt like a deliberate act of collective delusion, a desperate attempt to impose order on a chaos that defied understanding. I stayed on the job, of course. What else was I to do? The wilderness was my life, my calling, and perhaps now my curse. But every call, every trip into the green depths, became a subtle torment, a constant whisper of the inexplicable. Then came the second case. It was almost 2 years later, long enough for the sharp edges of the first to have dulled slightly, though the unsettling core remained. This time, it wasn't a lone hiker or a missing camper. It was a group of experienced survivalists, a team of four, 2 men and 2 women, all former military, on a week-long deep woods training exercise. They were well equipped, highly skilled, and intimately familiar with the terrain. Their itinerary had been meticulously filed, their comms checked, their emergency beacons active. They were, by all accounts, the least likely people to ever need search and rescue, which, I realize now, only made them more enticing to whatever lurked in the silent depths. Their distress signal came through on a Tuesday morning, a burst of garbled static followed by a weak, almost desperate, pre-recorded SOS message. It was irregular, cut off abruptly, not like a planned activation. My gut clenched instantly. This wasn't a sprained ankle or a lost compass. This was something far worse. The location pinged deep within a particularly remote section of the preserve, an old-growth forest known locally as the Whispering Pines, a name that, in retrospect, carried a heavier weight than anyone cared to admit. We mobilized immediately, a larger team this time, with an air support unit scrambling overhead. The weather was clear, no sudden storms, no heavy fog. Conditions were ideal, almost deceptively so. The initial ground team reached their projected coordinates within a few hours. What they found, or rather, what they didn't find, sent a fresh shiver down my spine. Their base camp was gone. Not just packed up and moved, but gone. There were no tent poles, no sleeping bags, no cooking gear, no personal effects, not even a discarded wrapper. The ground was undisturbed, as if no one had ever set foot there. Yet, the GPS coordinates from their initial check, verified by multiple sources, clearly placed them right at that spot. It was as if the entire camp, and the people in it, had been lifted cleanly from the forest floor, leaving not a single trace. There were no drag marks, no signs of heavy machinery, no evidence of a struggle, just pristine wilderness where a fully equipped survivalist camp should have been. It was the most complete, baffling absence I had ever witnessed. The air team, meanwhile, reported something equally unsettling. They were flying low over the search grid, their thermal imaging cameras sweeping the canopy. They picked up faint heat signatures, scattered irregularly over a 5-mile radius. Not grouped together. Team would be, but isolated, tiny points of warmth, flickering in and out. They guided us to the first one. It was one of the men, Sergeant Miller, a burly, capable individual who had served multiple tours overseas. We found him leaning against a massive, ancient oak tree, his eyes wide open, staring blankly ahead. He was still wearing his full tactical gear, his rifle slung over his shoulder, but something was terribly wrong. His skin was unnaturally pale, almost translucent, and his lips were tinged blue. There were no visible injuries, no blood, no signs of a struggle on his person or around him. He wasn't breathing. He wasn't cold, not yet, but his body felt empty, lifeless in a way that defied medical explanation. The medics on our team, seasoned professionals, checked him over, their faces growing increasingly perplexed. There was no pulse, no respiration, no brain activity. He was dead, but his body hadn't begun the process of rigor mortis, or cooling that would indicate how long he'd been gone. It was as if life had simply been drained from him, leaving behind an inert shell. His eyes, fixed on something unseen, held a look of profound soul, deep terror that made my stomach churn. It was the look of someone who had witnessed something unspeakable, something that had fractured their very perception of reality. We continued the search, the silence of the forest amplifying our unease. The second discovery was a woman, Lieutenant Jenkins, found a mile north of Miller. She was suspended in the branches of a towering hemlock, about 30 feet off the ground, entangled in a way that seemed impossible. Her body was bent at unnatural angles, but again, no visible external injuries, no broken branches on the way up, no disturbed bark on the tree trunk. Her eyes were wide, staring down at us with a similar, horrifying terror. Her skin was the same unnerving pallor as Miller's. It was as if she had been lifted, contorted, and placed there, a grotesque, silent tableau. Our climbing team had a hard time reaching her, and when they did, they reported the same unsettling lack of physical trauma, just that dreadful emptiness. The third team member, another man, Corporal Davies, was located 2 miles west of Jenkins, lying face down in a shallow creek bed. His face was submerged, but when we pulled him out, there was no water in his lungs. His clothes were dry beneath the surface, as if he hadn't actually drowned. His skin was the same ghastly blue, white, and on his back, visible through a tear in his tactical shirt, was a series of thin, perfectly parallel incisions. They weren't deep, barely breaking the skin, but they ran from his shoulder blades down to his lower back, precise and uniform, like someone had dragged thin, razor-sharp wires across his flesh. They didn't bleed. They were just there, red lines against his pale skin, a cold, clinical horror. No animal could make such marks, no branch, no rock. The fourth and final member of the team, Specialist Anya Sharma, was never found. We searched for weeks, expanded the grid even further, brought in more resources than on any previous case. We found nothing, not a single trace. No boot, no backpack, no compass, no keys. Nothing. It was a complete, chilling absence, a void where a person should have been. It was as if she had simply ceased to exist, plucked from reality without a whisper. The official reports were a scramble of half-truths and manufactured explanations, extreme wilderness exposure, possible animal attack followed by scavenging, unforeseen natural phenomena. They cited hypothermia, dehydration, exhaustion. They couldn't explain the perfectly placed keys from the first case, or the intact campsite, or the impossible positions of the bodies, or the unbleeding incisions. They couldn't explain the sheer, terrifying emptiness that permeated every aspect of this second case. I sat in on the debriefs, listening to the strained voices of the investigators, the forced casualness of the medics, the bewildered expressions of the new recruits. I saw the shared, uneasy glances among the veterans, the way they avoided each other's eyes when the impossible details were mentioned. We all knew, deep down, that this was not natural. This was not a lost hiker or a tragic accident. This was something else. After the debriefs, alone in my office, the memory of Sergeant Miller's eyes, wide and filled with primal terror, would replay in my mind. The image of Lieutenant Jenkins suspended impossibly in the tree, the clinical precision of the marks on Corporal Davies' back, and the utter, terrifying void left by Specialist Sharma. These cases, these anomalies, they weren't isolated incidents. They were threads in a pattern, a fabric of inexplicable horror woven into the very wilderness I had sworn to protect. They were proof that the old legends weren't just stories. They were veiled warnings, desperate attempts by those who came before us to describe an indescribable dread. I still work search and rescue. I still go into the woods. But every time I step beneath that dense canopy, I feel it. That cold, calculating patience. That ancient hunger. I know what's out there, what takes these people, what leaves behind these unsettling, impossible clues. It isn't human. And sometimes, when the wind blows just right through the pines outside my window, or the shadows stretch long and thin in the early morning light, I swear I can still hear it. That distant, mournful, almost animalistic cry. It lingers in the quiet moments, a haunting reminder of what I saw, or rather, what I didn't see, out in those woods. And I know, with a certainty that chills me to the bone and haunts my waking hours, that it's not just the wind, it's calling. And I fear that one day, it will call for me. The forest, it seems, has a way of keeping its secrets, and some secrets, they are best left undisturbed, for to look too closely is to invite the darkness in, to become part of the mystery yourself. My life had become a grim procession of searches, each one a fresh reminder of the two cases that had splintered my understanding of reality. The initial absence, the impossible keys, the solitary boot, it was a seed of doubt planted deep within me. The second case, the experienced survivalists, their vanished camp, their inexplicably drained bodies and precise, unbleeding incisions, that seed had blossomed into a thorny, poisonous growth, wrapping around my heart. I kept working, driven by a desperate, unspoken need to understand, to find the pattern, to confront the unspeakable. But every step into the forest felt like walking into a maw, and every call that came in felt less like a search and more like a summons. Then came the final case. The one that solidified everything I'd come to fear. The one that broke me. It wasn't a sudden disappearance, not at first. It was a gradual, creeping dread, a slow-motion descent into the abyss. It began with reports from residents bordering the Blackwood Forest, the same stretch that had claimed the survivalists. People were talking about strange occurrences, things they couldn't explain. Livestock vanishing without a trace, fences inexplicably torn down in sections, bizarre, almost melodic hums heard in the dead of night, too low to pinpoint, too pervasive to ignore. The sheriff's department dismissed them as local superstitions, overactive imaginations, or common wildlife. But I knew better. I felt the familiar prickle on my skin, the tightening in my chest. It was starting again. The first concrete call came from a group of hikers, not lost, but terrified. They'd been on a well-marked trail, popular with day trippers. They reported hearing a sound, a distinct, rhythmic thudding deep in the woods, off the trail. They described it as heavy, deliberate, like something massive moving with great purpose, yet oddly light-footed. They also mentioned a pervasive, sickly sweet smell, like rotten flowers mixed with something metallic. They were shaken, visibly trembling, and insisted they saw a large, shadowy figure moving between the trees, too quickly to identify, too large to be an animal. The local deputies, skeptical but obligated, did a perfunctory sweep. They found nothing. A week later, the reports escalated. Two hunters, seasoned woodsmen, went into a rarely visited section of the Blackwood, near an old, forgotten logging road. They were meticulous, precise, and deeply knowledgeable about the area. They didn't return. Their truck was found parked at the trailhead, untouched. No signs of struggle. No footprints leading away from the vehicle into the mud. Nothing. just an empty space where two men and their rifles should have been. This time, the alarm bells were ringing loudly for me. This wasn't a typical disappearance. This was a removal. The official response was slow, hampered by the previous cases, by the lingering, unspoken anxieties of the local law enforcement. There was a palpable reluctance to engage with the Blackwood, a collective sigh of dread whenever a new report came in. But the public pressure mounted. Two missing hunters, trained and armed, couldn't be easily dismissed. A full-scale search was finally authorized, and I, being the one with experience in these unusual cases, was reluctantly placed in charge of the ground teams. Reluctantly, because I knew what we were going to find, or not find. Reluctantly, because I knew this wasn't going to be about finding people. It was going to be about facing something that defied every rational explanation. We entered the Blackwood at dawn, a large contingent of officers, K-9 units, and volunteers. The usual chatter was muted, replaced by a tense silence. The air itself felt heavy, thick with a damp, earthy scent that carried an underlying, indescribable wrongness. We quickly located the hunters' last known coordinates deep in a tangle of ancient, grasping trees. There, we found their camp. Unlike the vanished survivalist camp, this one was present, but it was disturbed in a way that chilled me to the bone. Their tent was shredded, not torn by an animal, but meticulously ripped into ribbons, as if by something with great strength and intelligent precision. The fabric wasn't clawed. It was pulled apart along the seams, fiber by fiber. Their cooking stove was flattened, crushed into a pancake of metal. Their cooler was split open, its contents scattered but not eaten, just strewn about as if discarded by a petulant, enormous child. And then there were the tracks. Not footprints, not paw prints. These were impressions in the soft earth, wide and deep, yet strangely indistinct around the edges, as if the weight was immense but diffused. They were spaced impossibly far apart, suggesting a stride length that no known animal, certainly no human, could achieve. And they weren't continuous. They appeared in random spots, as if whatever made them was capable of simply appearing and disappearing at will. This wasn't a creature, it was a phenomenon. The K-9s, usually eager and focused, were agitated. They whined, their tails tucked, refusing to follow any scent, their ears flattened against their heads, as if listening to something we couldn't hear. One of the dogs, a brave German shepherd named Buster, suddenly recoiled, barking frantically at an empty patch of air, then clamped his jaws shut, whimpering, his body trembling violently. The handler couldn't calm him. It was a profound, primal fear emanating from an animal trained for courage. As we pressed deeper, the unsettling atmosphere intensified. The sickly sweet, metallic smell the hikers had reported became undeniable, a cloying odor that made my eyes water. The air grew colder, noticeably despite the warming sun. And then we heard it. That rhythmic thudding. It was faint at first, echoing through the dense foliage, then grew louder, closer, a slow, deliberate cadence. Thump, thump, thump. It sounded like something incredibly heavy, yet strangely soft, hitting the forest floor. It wasn't the gait of any animal I knew. It was methodical. Suddenly, one of the deputies, a young man named Peterson, screamed. We turned to see him pointing frantically, his face ashen, his eyes wide with a terror that mirrored Sergeant Miller's. "There! In the mist! It's enormous!" A shape began to coalesce in the swirling mist ahead of us, a truly gigantic form, impossibly tall, vaguely humanoid but utterly distorted. It seemed to shimmer, to waver at the edges, as if its very presence was straining the fabric of reality. I saw it too. A vast, dark silhouette, too large for the space it occupied, its limbs long and gangly, yet powerfully built. There was a low, resonant hum that seemed to emanate from it, vibrating in my bones, a sound that was somehow both melodic and deeply dissonant. This was the source of the thudding, the massive, quiet footfalls of a being that moved with a terrifying grace. It was then that I truly understood the ancient legends. Not just stories, but eyewitness accounts. This was not a ghost. This was not a monster in the conventional sense. This was something from beyond, something alien and primal, a predator that moved between worlds. It was the thing that consumed. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to flee, to abandon all hope of rational thought. But I was frozen, mesmerized by the sheer, overwhelming presence of it. It was too vast, too utterly other to comprehend. It felt like standing at the edge of an unfathomable abyss. And then, it turned its head, or what I perceived as its head. There were no discernible features, no eyes, no mouth, just a deeper void in the already shadowy form. Yet, I felt a terrible, piercing awareness, a sensation of being utterly seen, utterly known, and utterly judged. It was a cold, ancient intelligence, devoid of empathy, focused solely on its purpose. In that moment, a chilling, mournful cry, almost animalistic but profoundly unnatural, tore through the silence, seeming to echo from deep within the forest itself, a sound I recognized from the first two cases. But now, it was deafeningly close. It wasn't a cry of pain or sorrow. It was a cry of possession, a sound of immense power asserting its domain. And it was followed by a symphony of smaller, almost human-like whimpers. As the mist swirled around the impossibly tall figure, I saw them. Not clearly, but indistinctly, clinging to its vast, shadowy form. Figures. Human-like, translucent, shimmering at the edges like half-formed memories. They seemed to be embedded within its very being, parts of its monstrous whole. Their faces, though indistinct, held that same expression of profound, soul-shattering terror I had seen in Sergeant Miller's eyes. I saw a flicker of something that resembled the young woman from the first case, her hair a translucent wave, her features distorted in silent agony. And the hunters, their forms vague and indistinct, yet undeniably there. Part of the chilling tapestry. They weren't dead in the traditional sense, they were absorbed, their essence perhaps fuel for this incomprehensible entity. The entity raised a long, gangly arm, and for a fleeting moment, one of the human figures embedded within its shadowy form seemed to detach or reach out. It was then that I saw her. Specialist Anya Sharma, the fourth survivalist, the one we never found. Her form was more defined, more solid than the others. Her face contorted in a silent scream, her arm reaching out, a final, desperate plea. She was still there, somehow, trapped within the thing that had taken her. The entity's hum intensified, a low, pulsing drone that now felt like it was tearing at the very fabric of my mind. It was a sound of immense power, of pure, unfiltered malevolence. And then, with a horrifying fluid motion, it moved. Not walking, not running, but simply shifting, dissolving into the swirling mist, taking its silent, absorbed captives with it. The rhythmic thudding ceased. The sickly sweet smell dissipated. The profound cold receded. Silence descended, a heavier, more absolute silence than any I had ever known. The mist remained, but it was just mist now, innocent and mundane. The deputies around me were slumped on the ground, some retching, some crying silently, others staring ahead with vacant eyes. The K-Nyas were whimpering, pressing themselves against their handlers, their terror palpable. We had seen it. We had faced the impossible. I stood there, trembling uncontrollably. The image of Anya Sharma's reaching hand burned into my retina. She wasn't lost, she was taken. They all were. Not by a wild animal, not by the elements, but by something that transcended our understanding of life and death, something that consumed not just the body, but the very soul. The official report, when it finally came, was a masterpiece of obfuscation. Mass hallucination due to gas exposure. Psychological trauma from prolonged search efforts. A rare atmospheric phenomenon. They tried to explain away the collective terror, the consistent descriptions, the sheer, undeniable reality of what we had witnessed. They had to. To acknowledge it, to name it, would be to unravel the very fabric of their world. So they buried it under layers of jargon and medical diagnoses, dismissing us as traumatized, unstable. I retired from search and rescue shortly after. Couldn't do it anymore. Every call, every trip into the wilderness, it just felt like I was walking into a trap, bait for something unknowable. Looking for victims when I knew deep down I was just looking for the next one to disappear, or worse, to be absorbed. Because the woods, they don't give back everything they take, and what they keep for a reason. They keep it to feed. Now, I live far from the Blackwood, in a small town where the only wilderness is a neatly trimmed park. But the feeling never leaves me. Sometimes, when the wind blows just right through the pines outside my window, or the shadows stretch long and thin in the early morning light, I swear I can still hear it, that distant, mournful, almost animalistic cry. It echoes, not from the physical world, but from the cavernous emptiness within me. It's a sound that has become a part of my being, a constant, chilling reminder of what truly lurks beyond the thin veneer of our understanding. And I know it's not just the wind, it's calling. It's always calling. And I fear that one day, no matter where I hide, it will call for me, and I will be unable to refuse. The forest, it seems, has a way of keeping its secrets, and some secrets they are best left undisturbed. For to look too closely is to invite the darkness in, to become part of the mystery yourself, forever bound to the silent, hungry places